Welcome to Submission Radio, and even a pandemic can't stop this man from being in his rightful place, cage side UFC 249. The reason why the mayor of Jacksonville had to drive over the border to import more booze as they were severely depleted. You know you've made it when people are jacking your style cage side. That's, of course, John Morgan, from MMA Junkie and a friend of the program, back on the show, severely depleted and tired. And we're very grateful, John, for you joining us. It's been a crazy 24 hours. Just quickly, we saw you cage side. Is it true? Were people trying to wear the blue polo and break the rules, trying to blend in and be the new John Morgans, trying to steal the spotlight away from the legend himself?
The disrespect of this gentleman, I don't know that I can forgive it anytime soon. I mean, clearly there is an understanding of shirt color when you come to a UFC event, and this man paid no attention to it. Just sat there like it was okay to wear a blue shirt attending a mixed martial arts event. I was disappointed, to say the least.
So one of the situations where you take him out back and be like, listen, pal, I'll let you off once, but if this happens again and you've got like a knife pressed to him, like, we're not fucking around next time.
You abduct the daughter and, she calls in with a new photo of the newspaper or something like that, and it's never happening again.
Listen, these are conversations I'd prefer to have with you when the cameras aren't rolling, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. Look up under the yellow pages under Waterworks Professional Hitman. No, but in all honesty, it was a pretty wild event, and there is a lot to discuss here. Let's talk the fights first and foremost, right? The main event, crazy fight between Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje. Before we talk about Gaethje and his incredible performance, we got to mention Tony, because it did feel like, the event and narrative was very much about him. What did you think of the Tony Ferguson that you saw in there at UFC 249? Dana White said that he looked slow, and he mentioned that it had been a long camp since November. He did, however, once again re-earn everybody's respect with the insane amount of damage he took and how he ate most of Gaethje's power shots. But it was a wild night seeing Tony Ferguson, in a sense, get Tony Ferguson.
Yeah, it was. I mean, listen, it's hard to say, right? Because you don't want to take away too much from Justin Gaethje. I mean, I thought Justin Gaethje just looked phenomenal, man. That was just a great performance. And you don't want to discredit him by saying, oh, well, Tony Ferguson wasn't really in there that night. Dana did mention, the weight cut. And a lot of people speculated, when Tony made weight a couple weeks back unnecessarily, did that impact him? I don't know about that. I'm not 100% certain that it did, but I mean, I don't guess it could have helped him in any way. An extra weight cut probably didn't really make it beneficial for him. But yeah, man, you think about the length that he was training and all that he's been through. I mean, he's been on this whole ride, right? Justin Gaethje, Khabib was on the first part of this ride, and Justin Gaethje joined on the end of this ride. But Tony Ferguson's been there the whole time, all the ups and downs. You got to think the emotions, the mental taxations, and then obviously the fact that he had to change, approach for a very, very different opponent. I mean, obviously with Khabib Nurmagomedov, you're expecting heavy grappling. You've got to get, not just to grapple, but what Justin's coming out there to do. He's coming out there to throw leather. So, listen, a lot of things were going against Tony Ferguson. Now, I will say, I did think he looked a little bit flat. I did think he looked a little bit off. I don't know what I would point to, but there did seem, I didn't see quite as much creativity as we normally do. I didn't see the elbows coming out that we expect to see from him. And really even, much of an attempt to take the fight to the ground as I thought we'd see. Not that I didn't think he could strike with Justin Gaethje, but I don't know if you're setting out a game plan for Justin Gaethje. You say, hey, well, let's just stand in the pocket and see who lands hardest, or I don't know that sounds right. So yeah, again, I don't want to take away from Justin Gaethje by saying that, but it did seem like a little bit of an off night for Tony Ferguson, and you got to be bummed for him, man, because I think Tony could have passed on this fight if he wanted to, man. Once Khabib fell out, if Tony would have said, listen, I'm out too, I'm waiting on that fight, there's nothing you can make me do, I'm going to wait for it, I don't think anybody would have faulted him for that, and he didn't do it. He took the fight, and man, now the winning streak is over, now the title shots are gone, so damn shame, but man, what a chin, what a heart. I mean, the guy is absolutely a warrior, man. He's a phenomenal fighter, so yeah, tough result for Tony Ferguson, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like Jacksonville Tony Ferguson up there with Sea-Level Cain Velasquez and all those other mythical characters. Just quickly, before we jump to Justin, while we lament this, I know, as media, we're meant to be unbiased and all this stuff. I'm really pissed off. Not that Justin won or anything. I'm just pissed off that these are the circumstances that we don't get to see Tony and Khabib in all the glory with all the stakes that was supposed to happen in this fight. It was 5 years in the making, and we were this close to having it. And now we'll never have it. We may have it somewhere down the line, but it's never ever going to be what it once was. Are you as annoyed and disappointed about this as I am? It just, I don't know, like, I don't know if you guys remember, like, well, of course you remember when, like, Fedor lost. And it was like, you had to take a day to, like, let that sink in. Like, Jesus, the run is over. I'm not saying it was like that, but I don't know. I woke up a little bit bummed out today. Like, fucking hell, what a streak, and now it's over.
Yeah, it was a damn shame that this thing never came together because the way it's set up, man, the runs that these two guys had, the collision course that they were on. I will say this. I mean, it's replaced by the fact that Justin Gaethje last night looks like the kind of guy that could have beat Khabib Nurmagomedov. So for that reason, I'm excited. I've now transferred my excitement to Justin Gaethje versus Khabib. And I'll be honest with you, when a fight falls apart 5 times, I think I had started to kind of accept a little bit. You know what I mean? When somebody does you wrong 5 times, you start to realize, like, maybe it's just not meant to be. So, I am disappointed, of course, but I think I'd also really start to accept that, you know what, this is just the reality. We joke about the curse, but, man, something's not happening. This just might never happen.
And I mean, a guy like Tony Ferguson, with the abilities that he has, who knows? He might surprise us all, right, and come back, and eventually this fight might happen. But one of the things that people don't really speak about is the fact is this guy's 36 years old. And at 36 years old, and this is not something that was really brought up too much going into this fight, this is a massive risk taken by a guy like Tony Ferguson, who's, technically on the decline of his career. A couple of years from now, if he's only fighting once or twice a year, he'll be 38, 39. We're looking at a possible retirement. So just a crazy legacy there, but also an example of, and you look at these guys like Jorge Masvidal, for example, who are on these sort of great runs and have these BMF titles, it can just change in an instant in the wrong fight with the wrong risk, and things can change dramatically, which is why fighters really need to consider these risks and these opponents that they're taking. And it's just fascinating to see how quickly things can change. But let's talk about Justin Gaethje, John, because you mentioned it. I mean, it was impressive the way he was able to work Tony Ferguson's legs. He connected with some beautiful counters, and the way he kind of pulled back when coach Trevor Whitman told him, hey, man, what are you doing? Take 10% of your shots. You're trying to kill the guy out there. And he was able to change on the fly, be more reserved, and sort of changed with the game plan, was able to pull himself back and not rush in when he had Tony Ferguson hurt. I mean, what did you make of, I want to say it's Justin Gaethje 3.0, because 2.0 was a bit more defensive. 3.0 is a lot smarter in there than that last version of Justin Gaethje that we saw.
To me, it was just an absolute masterclass. I mean, that was phenomenal. I don't know that you could perform any better than that. As you said, man, he came out guns blazing. Trevor Whitman said, hey, pull the reins back a little bit. He listened. He staggered Tony early a couple times, but didn't rush in and try for the kill. Understood how be patient, pick your shots, the finish will come. You can tell he has full trust in Trevor Whitman and believes what he's saying. Man, it was interesting because with no crowd in there, Justin Gaethje was on our side of the cage, on the press row side of the cage. And normally, you can pick up a couple words here and there depending on, how close you are. But with no crowd, I mean, I could literally hear every word going on between them in the corner between rounds, and the conversations between them. Man, you could just hear the trust and the relationship between them, and him listening to exactly what Trevor Whitman was saying and then going out and executing it. It was just a masterful game plan. And, man, I loved it. I think it was after round 3 where he came back to the corner just like, damn, this is fun. It's just crazy. He's yelling this out and enjoying it. I mean, it's just amazing what he did in there, man. It was fun to watch. And I just don't know that there's anything he could have done. But I don't know there's really anything you look at and go, well, that was, you could have improved on this one. Save for the fact that maybe try not to get caught by that uppercut next time, because I thought that was going to end the fight, but it didn't. You can't say enough about Justin Gaethje, man. To be as all action as he is and aggressive as he is, and then as you said, not only just 2.0 but 3.0. I mean, continually improving, and man, the way he talks about it and his mindset and his focus. I mean, the guy just has it all going right now, man. Everything is dialed in for him, and it makes me excited, man. It makes me excited because as dominant of a champion as Khabib Nurmagomedov is, and as great as he is, it's fun to see if somebody can take that O off the record, right? And man, Justin looks about as dangerous as it comes.
Telling Tony Ferguson being an asshole gets you nowhere. What a classic moment in that octagon as well. I was going to say, though, man, you mentioned how you were able to sort of hear them in the octagon. We also saw how the broadcast team, obviously Joe Rogan, DC, and John Anik, as they were commentating the fight, many fighters are actually taking what they were saying and implementing it into their fights, which then brings up this crazy thing of like, all right, so is Joe Rogan and DC and John Anna going to be the third cornering team for the fighters of the future for the UFC? I mean, where do you sit on it? I mean, in a weird kind of crazy way, because, and we love, I love Joe Rogan. I was going to call him John Rogan. It's because John Morgan is the real Joe. But I love John Rogan, and I love what he does. But at the same time, he has a tendency to focus on one fighter when he commentates fights. So that's one fighter sometimes getting all the advice, while the other one is just sitting there and listening to it. Is there an unfair advantage here that could eventually build up if these guys keep sort of doing this? Do they have to go be transported into another area for the time being? Where do you sit on it?
And Dominick Cruz has got great analysis as well.
Yeah, right. No, it's really, really interesting because look, like I've seen fights with no crowds present before, right? Like I've been in the Ultimate Fighter gym during tapings of that. I've been in the Contender Series gym where it's just, some people, but not a ton. But in both those situations, the commentators aren't there calling the fights as well, right? So the two things that were different in the empty arena, I mean, anytime there's no crowd, like it's amazing the conversations you hear, the sound of the punches and the kicks. I mean, they reverberate in a different way. I mean, you can really tell the weight of every shot. But the two things that were kind of interesting this night were, first of all, Bruce Buffer in an empty arena is crazy, man, because that dude is so full of energy, and he feeds off that crowd, and when he's just out there, blah, and there's just dead silence. That was crazy, man. So props to Bruce Buffer because he's getting zero feedback. But yeah, the commentary, it's interesting because you could definitely hear it right away. You're like, wow, it is really loud. And I'll tell you a moment that it really stood out to me was at the start of the Cowboy and Anthony Pettis fight. Rogan's laying out there about how frustrated Cowboy must be after looking terrible his last time out and all the disappointment. And I was half expecting Cowboy to just like turn to him like, can you shut up, please? Like I'm trying to. But I'll say this: it's an interesting point you make about is it an advantage. Now I will say this. It takes a very high-level fighter to be able to listen to that information, process it, and make adjustments on the fly. And if you're that capable of doing it, in what is a chaotic situation already, man, go for it. But and at the same time, you are right. Somebody's keying in on one fighter, like you say, Rogan may key in on one. But if the other guy is hearing the adjustments too, and he's like, okay, I bet he's about to dip this way, or I bet he's about to look for that takedown, or I bet he's about to switch to a double. So I don't know that I'd really say you got to worry about it being an advantage. It is weird though, man. I'm telling you, like it is weird how much you can hear them. I don't think the UFC is going to want to move them to a different place. I mean, it's different. Like watching. I mean, you guys understand. I mean, watching fights on a monitor versus watching fights cage side, man, it's an entirely different thing. So I don't think they'd want to move them to another room. I mean, even if you move them back a little bit, like even if you pull them away from the cage, when there's nothing else going on in there, like I still think you're going to hear them. So, I've wondered before. I call some fights on the regional level, and sometimes in some of the smaller venues or during the earlier prelims, there's not a lot of people in there. I've always wondered. I'm like, I'm pretty damn sure they can hear what we're saying right now. Like, I wonder if they're making adjustments. But last night made it painfully clear that, yeah, absolutely they are. But I honestly don't see the UFC changing that. I really don't. I don't think you want to pull your commentators into another room. I think that makes their job very, very difficult.
I would just be devastated if I'm like a prelim fighter in the UFC and Joe Rogan, who's the hero for a lot of these fighters because he's such a powerful figure in the sport, is going, oh man, Dennis's performance is just pretty disgraceful in this octagon as I'm fighting, being like, oh man, it's like imagine Joe Rogan commentating this podcast and being like, oh, another shit question from Dennis here when he's interviewing Colby Covington, and I'd be like, in my head, I'd be like, fuck, man, it's it'd take me out of the game. So it must be pretty disappointing from that regard. But just quickly on that fight, John, what did you think of the stoppage between Tony and Justin? Were you happy with it? Did you agree with it?
100%. Yeah, I mean, listen, he had been wobbled. Tony had been wobbled a few times before, but at that one. Man, you can see something different happen, man. And I don't know if that's the exact moment. We found out since he has an orbital fracture. I don't know if that's the exact moment it happened, but you could just see something wasn't right. And there was a difference between trying to wobble, but it was like he was trying to regain exactly where he was and trying to figure out his equilibrium and why it wasn't balancing. He was taking some damage. I know there wasn't a lot of time left in the fight, but I was totally fine with the stoppage. Speaking of being able to hear, immediately I could see Dana White get up and he said, good job, ref, good job, ref. So he certainly agreed with it. I had no problem with the stoppage. I mean, look, Tony Ferguson, I mean, he's a damn warrior, man. He really is. And I'm sure he would have liked to continue going, but Herb Dean was looking out for his safety there.
But on your point, Dennis, it almost makes certain fights even more, in anticipation of seeing him, knowing like certain fighters might hear what Joe Rogan and these guys have to say. You got Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns coming up. You might see like 2 fights happening at the same time. Hey, what's that about my cardio? My cardio is great. You shut up over there.
What did you say about my rap career?
John, you did say that Justin Gaethje, the one that you saw, the 3.0 that you saw yesterday, I mean, you like his chances against Khabib. I'm just curious what, sort of how you see that fight potentially playing out. And also, do you think that is the next fight that we will see? We know that Dana White says a lot of things. We even saw Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz going back and forth in Instagram comments. Conor McGregor saying to Nate Diaz, sign the contract. I believe he said, shut your eyelid and sign the contract. Do you think it could be looking at, Nate and Conor in between Justin and Khabib, or do you think the UFC pull the old Rochambeau and Dana White, fulfills his plan that he's wanted so badly, which is Khabib and Conor in the rematch?
I'm just still not sold on Conor fighting without a crowd, man. I'm really not. That's a lot of money to give up, and Dana White even mentioned that this week in a pre-fight scrum where he's like, listen, that is a lot of money to give up at the gate, and the type of the live gates that Conor McGregor generates. I think Conor McGregor is going to take a pay cut, basically. I think if in order for them to make this work, I think Conor would have to renegotiate and say, listen, I'll take a little bit less money. I mean, you can't give away, $15 million at the gate the way, when he fights. So I'm just not sure he's going to fight. Maybe he will.
Conor McGregor taking that pay cut?
I don't know, man. Conor is looking out for him. He's a smart businessman, man. I don't think he'd like to set that precedent. I don't think he'd like to make it seem like he was dropping his price. I mean, if he gets desperate enough that he wants to fight, if he sees Fight Island or whatever the case it is and sees, I mean, because listen, we haven't seen the numbers yet from the pay-per-view, but I'm sure they were good, man. I did more, mainstream kind of radio hits like throughout the country from different radio stations this past week than I have since probably like Mayweather McGregor. I mean, just radio stations that normally have other sports to talk about have nothing to talk about. So the live sport came back, they're like, dude, let's talk fights, and I had a couple radio hosts even mention like, hey man, to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about this, but we'd love to talk about it. It's like, absolutely, let's do it.
That's what we say every week, John, to you.
So 100%, I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate it. We'll teach you one of these days, guys. We'll get you educated one of these days.
I love how he says mainstream as well. What are we here? Chopped liver, John? What's going on? Mainstream. There's a stream, all right? We're all in it. We're like a bunch of bass going upstream, all right? Stop comparing us to these stations overseas.
Too funny. But yeah, you know what? Listen, I don't know. We'll see. But I do think Khabib and Justin Gaethje is the next fight. Let's not forget they share a manager as well, who I'm sure wouldn't mind getting paid on both sides of the coin on that one. So we'll see. Conor gets to call a shot. There is no question about that. I will say that Conor does call the shots, man. He is the biggest star in the sport, and if he wants to step in, I'm sure he could. But I just don't know. I don't know if it'll happen without a crowd, man. That's a big change in financial situation.
Before we move on and go next. Sorry, Dennis, did I cut in there?
Nah, jump in, man. That's a good point. What did you want to bring up?
I was going to say, before we talk about Henry Cejudo and, Henry Cejudo, his win over Dominick Cruz and his potential retirement, which obviously we'll discuss to see if it's a real retirement or one of those fake MMA retirements that almost got us fired the other week. Obviously, we're going to talk about COVID-19 testing and how the whole week played out for the fighters and yourself obviously being there, John. I want to talk about this Jacare situation, go back a little bit in time. It was obviously known on Wednesday in Florida that Jacare and his cornerman were compromised, and then only 2 days later when the results officially came back, that's when the fight was pulled. And in the meantime, you got Jacare hanging out with Fabrizio Verdum and other fighters. He's not isolated. He's still in the same hotel. He's doing face-offs. Dana White's touching and fist-bumping him and then the rest of the fighters, giving Michelle Waterson a hug. What do you make of what I would call some of the recklessness that the UFC were calling a win and saying that the system works? From someone in yourself who was there the whole week, what did you observe?
Yeah, I would say the recklessness that I mostly saw did come from Dana White, and the touching, and it is hard. I mean, I've mentioned this, like we need to figure out something that's okay to do right now. Because, like, you don't want to be rude and you don't want to be awkward, and you see people, and are we supposed to fist bump or elbow bump or just give a little, hey, what's up? I mean, I understand it. You know, that's what Dana does. He fist bumps the fighters. He hugs the fighters. He does that. And I think he wants to, you know, show that there's as much normalcy as possible, especially when you consider, you know, we've all been tested and everybody's been negative, except that he wasn't negative. You know what I mean? And so he did touch Jacare. Now, in fairness, Jacare did have a mask on. Jacare did have surgical gloves on as well. So, you know, there were some precautionary steps taken there for sure. You know, the hanging out with Fabricio Verdum, you know, I never saw that video. I know it was deleted. I've seen some screen caps of it. To me, it looks like it was just at the weigh-ins, basically, when they were together, you know, for a brief moment at the weigh-ins as they were corralled in the same area. I mean, I can tell you from being in this hotel all week, we're basically told don't come out of your room unless you need to, unless you absolutely have to, like stay in your room, self-quarantine. When you come out of your room, make sure you wear a mask at all times, basically on property. Make sure that you social distance. Make sure you stay away from people that, you know, you're not gathering in groups, that you're staying the proper distance from each other. It is not the feel of a normal fight week. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, man, they're walking around the hotel. People are not walking around this hotel. You go down to the lobby, and there's not people hanging out, man. It's empty. I mean, yes, there's a couple people like I woke up this morning. I went down, got a cup of coffee and a breakfast croissant. I sat down alone at a table, took my mask off, ate my breakfast croissant, put my mask back on, and went back upstairs. And that's the only time I've been out of my room today. I have not left the property since I got here on Wednesday because we've been asked, hey, once you do the medical testing and got here, please stay on property. There are restaurants here. Luckily, I found a beer delivery service, so that has been a lifesaver. Excellent. Yeah, so that's been phenomenal. So I haven't left the property at all except to go to the arena. And when we went to the arena, mask on the whole time. When we sat on the bus, we were socially distanced on the bus. They actually said, hey, here's how we want you to sit, you know, across the aisle, one row in between. So, I mean, listen, the UFC is taking precautions. Like, if anybody's going to paint it out that the UFC isn't trying their best and isn't making sure that at every step along the way, you know, they've got guidelines and safety protocol and all that in place, that would be inaccurate. They do. They are trying their damnedest. That said, yeah, I mean, it's on tape. I mean, for Dana to touch Jacare and then other people and that sort of thing, I mean, he could inadvertently be spreading the germs to all these other places, spreading the virus. Now, again, I think most people feel safe. I think Joe Rogan said on the broadcast, the post show, I didn't see it, but I heard that he said afterwards, look, I feel safe doing these interviews because we've all been tested. But don't forget, you know, we don't necessarily have all the test results back. So I would, you know, I don't know what we'll see for the Wednesday card and the Saturday card, but I think it would be advisable of Dana White to not do those fist bumps, to not do those hugs. I mean, it's unnecessary, you know, especially we're not trying to sell pay-per-views for these next two cards. Like, I get it, man. He was trying to make the return as big as possible. So, I mean, maybe we just forego the face-offs for the next two cards. I mean, is it necessary? And here's the weird part, because
Henan Barrow TJ style on a Monday.
Yeah, please, no, just scrap them, all right? Don't do that. Just scrap them, all right? Yeah, no, but, you know, it's like, you know, there is the argument like, hey, I mean, it's fine if they face off because they're going to have guaranteed physical contact the next day. And you can make that argument. I'm okay with that argument. But, I mean, that is 24 hours earlier than they actually need to have contact. And, again, if Dana's going to be in there fist bumping all of them, and that's potential cross-contamination right there between all the athletes and that sort of thing. So, you know, I don't think the UFC has been reckless. I think that would be a wrong way to characterize it. But there are ways that they can improve. And I think, you know, I don't know if anybody's going to be, you know, willing within the organization to step up and tell Dana, don't do it. But to be honest with you, man, I say scrap the face-offs for now, man. You know, if you can't not fist bump and you can't, you know, not touch each other and that sort of thing, like just scrap them for now. We still get the fights next day.
And I think one of the big points was just like the common sense point of, all right, if Jacare was in contact with someone who had the virus, why is this man allowed to come in and then fight? And it looks like this morning the UFC has sent out an email to all the fighters for the upcoming fight card midweek and at the end of the week, asking if they've been in contact with anybody with COVID-19 and trying to figure out if they have any symptoms. So it looks like they realize, okay, we won't let people who have been in contact with people with COVID-19 even come to the hotel, which is a common sense thing that should probably be done. And you mentioned about the lack of weigh-ins and face-offs. We also heard other ridiculous things, John, such as a hotel restaurant, which is connected to the hotel, being open to the public, people doing the testing, saying it's not FDA approved, and the tests came back with lots of false positives. And then there's no way the lab can run that many tests around in such a short amount of time. Do you think some of these things can be addressed and fixed up by the UFC ahead of these other cards coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that the restaurant. I mean, there is 3 restaurants on site, but we have to have a wristband to be on property, like at all, like this. I've got this colored wristband, and it changes colors every single day. And we have to go every single day. And when you walk in the lobby, you get asked by hotel security, where are you? Show me your wristband. So I don't know if that's true, but maybe it is, but I don't know. But the tests and that sort of thing, yeah, that's a problem. I don't know if it's a problem that the UFC can necessarily fix. I mean, I think that that's just where we are right now. I mean, right, at least the news I've read is that we're so in the early development stages of these tests that they're not necessarily as accurate as we want them to be. But, I mean, would you rather have them not use testing at all, or would you rather say, look, man, these are the best tests we have access to. We're going to try our best. As far as the lab maybe not being able to process all the samples and stuff in time, which it seems like maybe that was the case here, that's concerning for sure. And I would think at the very least, if you don't prevent somebody from coming here that says they've had contact with COVID-19, at least you have their tests expedited, right? You make sure that their test is flagged and say, listen, this person said, yes, I have definitely had contact. Can we get theirs ASAP? And I think that's what they're trying to do. And, at the press conference last night, Dana White said it. Hey, listen, I think we did a good job this week, but we'll continue to get better. We learned, and we're going to make changes. And as you said, now this email got sent out. And, listen, they're trying to figure this out in real time. And I listen, I can tell you I've seen the commitment and what they want to do. The operations staff here is trying to do the best they can, and they all believe in it. Nobody's just paying this thing lip service and going like, yeah, come on, it's not really that big a deal. Just say you did it. That's not the way people are acting about things. Masks are on. Gloves are on. Social distancing, quarantine. I mean, all that stuff is being used. They're doing the best they can. And I think I actually tend to agree with Dana White. I think they will continue to get better.
I think everybody in the UFC and all the staff, everyone's working super duper hard as far as all this stuff goes. I think that's undeniable. I just think that maybe they're limited by some of the technology and what's readily available. Like, if the tests are not FDA approved, and if like Jacare is, I don't want to say walking around because maybe he was in his hotel room, but if people know on Wednesday, like, dude, this guy probably has it, and then it's like 2 days later, they're finding out, and the fight's officially off. But he's already done a stare down that day. It boggles my mind. Like, what if somebody, tests the day before the fights? It's like, what, 2 days later we get the results back and the fights have already happened. So it is a crazy situation. The other thing that's interesting, we've got to ask you about this, John, is that the New York Times and Yahoo Sports both confirmed the existence of a non-disparagement clause in fighters' contracts that basically prevent them from suggesting or communicating that the event is being held without appropriate health, safety, or other precautions. And if violated, the UFC can essentially withhold their purses, their win bonuses, other fight-related bonuses, and event-based merchandise royalties. Obviously, you would have seen Showtime's Steven Espinoza also weighed in on Twitter about the documents, saying that they don't match up with Dana White's comments about the clause only pertaining to false comments. Jeez, I feel like a lawyer sitting here saying this kind of stuff. And that disparaging comments or criticisms would allow the UFC to basically withhold fighters' purses. Dana White saying, like, look, it's just a disparagement clause. But apparently in these clauses, it's not just disparagement. If you say anything about the UFC's practices towards COVID-19, you could lose all your money. What did you make of this, John?
Yeah, no, I actually had some access, I guess, to information on this because, listen, everybody that's involved signed the same agreement. Basically, anybody that wanted to be a part of this event, from what I understand, fighters, media members, USADA inspectors, vendors, basically anybody that had something to do with this event had to sign the agreement. And when I read that clause, initially I thought, well, that seems a little wild. How does it? And when I initially read it, I said, well, I don't think this even applies to me as a media member, but I said, you know what, I better find out because if I can't observe what I'm doing and I can't say what it is I'm covering, then what the hell am I even doing? So I actually reached out to the UFC legal team and I said, hey, listen, I want to know if I can I know you want me to sign this agreement. Can I take this clause out because I don't think that this makes sense. And they said, well, no, listen, you can't take the clause. I mean, we're asking everybody to sign the same standard contract. If we allow everybody to individually mark it up and that sort of thing, it's not really it would be difficult for us to enforce everything. I said, okay, well, let me ask you something. I'm like,
they're like the printers out of ink and
yeah, can't do that. But I get it. They're saying, look, we want everybody to be on the same contract. You know what I mean? It's not fair if we say, yeah, well, they didn't do this and they said that and all that. Then it gets very difficult. So I get it. So I said, well, listen, I don't understand what tell me what this means. Explain to me. And this was, I was talking with some top legal folks at the UFC. I said, explain to me what this means, disparaging remarks. I can't, if I see something, I can't be critical of it. If I see something that I think is not right or is not being held safely, I can't report on it. And they said, absolutely not. That is not what this is whatsoever. They're like, I clearly see how you could read it that way, but I assure you, they've given me written confirmation as well as a verbal confirmation. Said we will not stand in the way of you doing your duties as a journalist. This pertains to information that is false. And if you look up the legal definition of it, every legal definition you read of it is saying something false. So basically, it's like if you were to come out and say, I'm here on scene, and I can tell you right now, the UFC is not testing anyone. It's chaos. This is crazy. Then they're going to sue you, and they're going to say you are lying. That is 100% not true. Now, if I were to say to you, hey, I think the fact that Dana White was fist bumping and hugging everybody might have presented some dangers to some other people, I'm not going to get sued for that. That's my opinion. That's my observation. I'm allowed to do that. I presented factual information and told you how it offers my concern. So that is not what they're doing. So I understand why people read that clause were alarmed. I read that clause and was alarmed. And before I signed it, I reached out to the UFC and said, explain this to me further and make sure I understand this correctly, because I'm not a lawyer and I want to make sure that you're not saying I can't say anything. And so anyway, that's how it applies to me as a media member. But I was told it applies to everybody that way. If a fighter comes in here and says, look, here's what happened, and let me tell you why I felt unsafe, or let me tell you where I think the UFC went wrong, they're fine. Now, if they come in and give some false information or make something up, then at that point, now there's some potential legal repercussions. But I do not see the UFC making a practice of suing their own fighters. That is not going to happen unless there's some crazy definition. So I don't know. I was a little surprised by the report. I mean, I understand why the New York Times reported what they did, Yahoo, but I understand why everybody reported it. It was weird to me when I read it. But at the same time, I don't know. Like, I've seen some of those things on social media today. You guys are actually the first people to reach out and ask me, hey, did you sign this and why, if you did? I've seen some of the stuff that people are saying on social media, and I think, man, pick up the phone.
Twitter's a shitstorm right now.
It's weird, man. It's like,
dude,
just call and find out. Hey, I've seen people say, oh, if you're a media member and you went there, you should be discredited or whatever. Like, well, no, I did my due diligence as well, and I made sure that, I was still allowed to do my job as a media member as I see fit.
It's a fascinating situation. And by the way, we appreciate the honesty and you breaking it down for us, John, because it wasn't something that we planned on speaking to you about because you were scheduled to come on the show for a while, but it just popped up. So it's great to get some clarity on the situation.
Glad you brought it up.
Yeah. Just quickly, a couple more things on it. The first one, you mentioned how obviously if you say something's incorrect, like Dana White is actually a duck from Mars, you might get sued by a lawyer, right? But I'm just wondering, do you think this affects the way the media approaches the sport going forward? I mean, some people might feel threatened to report that a certain fighter's out or a certain fighter something's going on behind the scenes between the company and a fighter because they might get sued. Do you anticipate that it affects the way that we report the sport live on the scene? And then also, Eric McGrecken, and I might have destroyed his surname, but he's a fantastic lawyer that covers the sport, says the UFC waiver not only asks the fighters to waive rights, but also on behalf of the spouse, children, and grandparents. Do you think that could be a bit of an issue as well, considering yourself, you might head home and who knows what's going to happen with a family, but also as a fighter, if you got family with you who gets sick or anything happens, they're sort of covered by it. They can't really say anything and they have to deal with the consequences of the contract too.
Yeah, so kind of two parts there, I guess. The first part, will this contract affect how people cover the sport? I would hope not. If you're a media member, you have a responsibility to report on what you're observing and what you're finding out and being factually correct. And man, I've always said it from day one. I mean, just don't lie. Don't make up things. Make sure you cover your bases. Make sure you verify facts. Anything you say, make sure it's 100% factually accurate. If you do that, you don't have to worry about what you're saying. And if the UFC is going to come out and sue you because you wrote something or reported something that is factually accurate, can you imagine the PR nightmare that would be for them? That this billion-dollar company is suing a reporter for reporting something that is factually accurate. I mean, why would they do that? So no, I don't think it should. It shouldn't stop you. And I would hope that every media member knows that they work for an organization that would certainly stand behind them in a situation like that. If they're independent, that they would at least hope that, the court of public opinion and society as a whole would stand on their fact that if they're, that's what this country was built on. You know what I mean? Like, for you to be sued for saying something factually accurate. Now, so I would hope not. I certainly, once I understood that basically what they were saying was, if you say something that would be libel or slander, we're coming after you. Well, that's already there anyway. So that clause to me didn't affect me, and I would hope that it didn't affect anybody else. As far as the protection from the COVID-19, maybe it's just me, but I just kind of assume that's going to be the way the world is right now, man. Everybody, every company, everybody. To be honest with you, I was surprised my own company didn't ask me to sign some kind of waiver or something that they're not responsible for me if I come out here. I just think that these kind of waivers are going to be commonplace moving forward to say, hey, listen, this thing is out there, and it's not our fault if you get it. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. It didn't shock me to see that kind of language in there. But, again, I'm not a legal expert either, but it didn't set out as alarming to me. I get it. And listen, if I felt unsafe here, if I got here and I have a wife and a kid to answer to, man, and obviously love them more than anything, man. I'm missing my son's birthday to be here. And I promised I would never miss my son's birthday again. But being a part of this, historical moment and observing to see if it's being handled correctly, I thought was imperative for me to do as a reporter. But I'm telling you right now, if I got here and I thought, holy Christ, like I am in serious danger here, I would be on the first plane back home. I wouldn't need a waiver or anything like that to get out of here, and I would be gone because I don't want to get sick and I don't want to die. I want to see my child continue to grow and evolve, and I want to see these things happen. But I can tell you from what I'm seeing, I believe the UFC is doing their best, and I've said it from day one, and I'll continue to say it. If you believe that we should wait until there's a vaccine to do anything in this world, then I appreciate your position and I understand it. If you think that we shouldn't do anything, that sports should be shut down, that businesses should be shut down, that society should be shut down until we have a vaccine, if that is your position, then I completely respect it and I understand your concern for security and safety. However, if that's not your position, then you do need to understand that the only way we're going to be able to operate in an environment in the meantime with COVID-19 out there is finding the right safety protocol to get us through. And I feel like that's what the UFC is doing here. I feel like that's what I came to observe, and I feel like it's what I've seen so far. Is it perfect? It's not, but I feel like they're doing pretty good, and I feel like they can continue to make tweaks as we go along.
I'm very glad that you're there, John, especially for the next two events, because it's going to be very interesting, especially to hear from you, like how these things are playing out, because you were there for the first event, you're going to be there for the second, and I hope you're there for the third, John.
I'll tell you what, if I'm on a plane back home, you don't have to wait for the report on MMA Junkie to figure out what happened. I'm going home, but no. So far, I'm telling you, man, the commitment to safety here has been top level.
USA Today has a lot of money, John, since there's no contract signed there. I mean, let's just take MMA Junkie down and buy a mansion over here in Australia. We can share some beers.
I was just going to say one more thing just on the whole clause and the disparagement. Eric McRacken also made an interesting point. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it, John. And it was, how can any athletic commission be okay with a clause that says a promoter can withhold a fighter's purse if they raise a health or safety concern? Basically saying that, it is the commission's job to make things safe, and if fighters aren't allowed to speak their minds on things. I guess the interesting thing about it is, right, like, you're smart, you called the legal team and you asked certain questions. I just feel like most fighters won't do that, and you're going to hear a whole lot of nothing as far as fighters talking about, any kind of precautions or health and safety, because everybody's going to be too scared to say any word about it in case they get sued or lose their job or, don't get their fight purse.
But let's be honest. I mean, how many people do you think actually read the full contract? I mean, how many people just said, okay, I'll sign it, I'll go. And I'm not saying that makes it right, but I do not get this feeling, at least, again, and I've been here, I've been talking to these people occasionally from distance, and I'm telling you that the people that I've run into feel safe. I mean, everybody, I have not found somebody that's like, bro, man, I can't say anything because I'm afraid to get sued, but you want to get out of here? I mean, it's just not the feeling. I mean, steps are being taken. So, and again, the point, and to go back, I guess, to the original question about Erickson, I didn't see the point, but I mean, obviously, if you're quoting it correctly and I'm reading it there, I don't think that's the concern. I do not, in that clause, in the conversations that I had, I mean, I know that Dana phrases things one way, okay? And he's actually accurate in what he said last night. He just doesn't say it sometimes in the most legal way. We know he's a fiery guy. I talked to the attorneys that are behind the company as well. And again, it was pointed out. The type of information we're talking about would be information that is false, that is not accurate, that is made up. So if a fighter, a commission saying, well, if a fighter can't voice concerns. I do not believe this clause limits fighters from voicing concerns. And I talked to the legal team that wrote it, that put it together, and that would be responsible for enforcing it. And they said the same thing to me, that it's not about, if somebody comes in and says, you know, I was concerned a little bit about this, they're not getting sued. It's okay. And in fact, I'm sure the UFC would like to hear it because they want this thing to be safe. It is in the UFC's best interest for this thing to go off as safely as possible. It is not in the UFC's best interest to act reckless here and to, oh yes, we got UFC 249 in, but 300 people got sick. Guess what happens? You get shut down at that point. Were your pay-per-view sales from UFC 249 going to sustain your business for the rest of the year? Absolutely not. I don't understand why people don't get. It's in the UFC's best interest to make sure that this is as safe as possible. They're not going to act in a reckless manner. Now, could they have been a little bit more active on Jacare? Yeah, I think they could have, But I'm telling you, I didn't see Jacare around the property at all. I didn't see his cornerman around the property at all. Not once. I saw him at the weigh-ins. And again, that goes back to, well, maybe we shouldn't have the face-offs. Maybe we should just have the weigh-ins, which again, at the weigh-ins, it wasn't normal where people were in the back. The official weigh-ins, there weren't a ton of people in there together and, coming in at the same time. So again, the UFC is taking steps. And listen, I'm not trying to sit here and defend the UFC as being perfect, but I think unless people are actually observing everything up close and seeing it and asking questions, it's easy to sit back from afar and say, oh man, they're just acting reckless. You need to come here and see what's being done. Watch the steps. See how things are happening. Can you shoot holes in it? Maybe you can. Cool. Point out the holes, and I bet the UFC will try to fill them in because it's not in their best business interest to let things fail.
Well, let's talk about the fights because there's a couple more things I want to get your thoughts on. And by the way, we appreciate your thoughts on all that, John. It's an unbelievable situation. You've given us a lot of clarity on it. Want to talk about Henry Cejudo, though, before you wrap up, because he had an incredible performance over Dominick Cruz. He had that knee. That knee was a thing of beauty. What did you think of the stoppage in the fight? What did you think of Henry Cejudo's performance? And what did you think of the way Dominick Cruz looked in there? Because I know last time you were on the program, you mentioned how, hey, there might be a little bit of a slowdown from the Dominick Cruz that we've seen in the prime. What did you think of the way he looked in there this weekend?
I thought Henry Cejudo fought a smart fight. Obviously it makes sense. I mean, if you got somebody that's mobile, what do you want to do? Take the legs out, right? And that's exactly what Henry Cejudo tried to do. Round one, man, I thought, I don't want to say that Dominick Cruz looked off, but it just, I didn't see quite the offense that I would expect to see from him. Saw the movement, but maybe not necessarily the offense that you'd want to see. I thought Dominick started to settle in a little bit in round two. So, I'm not ready to write Dominick off as washed up or anything like that, man. I think he's still got talent. And listen, man, if Henry Cejudo really is retired, hell, I wouldn't have a problem with Dominick Cruz coming out and fighting for a title in his next fight. You know what I mean? It wouldn't bother me one bit. This guy is a legend. I'm sure there's some other contenders that might say, hey, we let it happen once. Let's not do it again right away. But, I think Dominick Cruz still has a ability left. As far as the stoppage goes, I would say watching it live, watching it unfold, completely understood the stoppage, man. The knee landed, and the knee, he was hurt from the knee. Cejudo comes in. The punches are landing. Dominick is in a little bit of an awkward spot up against the cage. He's trying to recover, and it was difficult to see as he was trying to get back to his feet, how much balance did he have? Where was he there? So I understood it because it looked like Cruz was really hurt. I will say that, afterwards, when anytime you see somebody that's right with it, you're like, oh, man, was this a bad call? Important to point out, of course, 2 seconds left in the round. I always like to point out to people, do not let that factor in your decision as to whether or not it was a good stoppage or a bad stoppage. Referees are instructed that fighter safety is paramount. It does not matter how much time is left on that clock. It can be 4:59.9, and if you feel that a fighter is not intelligently defending himself, you stop that fight because fighter safety is paramount. So do not let time factor in. Now, if you're Dominick Cruz or you're a Dominick Cruz fan, I understand why you'd say, there's 2 seconds left. Like, let it go. I get it. But remember,
and Keith Peterson smelled like booze and cigarettes.
Well, listen, there's several of us might have smelled like booze and cigarettes. Don't judge the man for that, okay?
He might have been smelling here, John.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Listen, I was sitting in there. I was cage side. I apologize. If that was me emanating on to Keith Peterson, I apologize. But no, so but I will say when I watch the replay, I'm like, so it's one of those ones where, and I hate to sit on the fence because what I'll say is, probably what I would say is, watching it live, I thought it was right. So that means I thought it was right. Watching the replays, I completely understand Dominick's complaints. And I also get, man, just the frustration, finally getting back and that sort of thing, why he would be, upset. I hope he'll continue on. I didn't see anything out of him that necessarily, like I said, I thought maybe a little bit of a slow start, but I didn't see anything out of Dominick that made me think like, oh, this guy just shouldn't be in there anymore. I mean, Henry Cejudo is a phenomenal fighter, and I think he gets shortchanged sometimes just because people don't like his personality, and so they want to, discredit him as a fighter, but that's a mistake. So I'd love to see Dominick in there. I'd really like to see Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yan for the 135 title. If Cejudo really is out, I'd really like to see Sterling and Yan for the title. I feel like they're the top two that deserve it right now, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, it is a tough one because, like you mentioned, hindsight is 2020, and in that, like, when you see Dominick Cruz kind of going up and trying to get back up, we've seen fighters kind of on autopilot once they're badly hurt, and in the real time, I think I counted like 12 punches, unanswered punches, and that was after the knee. So I totally understand why Keith Peterson stopped the fight, and I do think it was the right call. Even though love to see Dominick Cruz hopefully return and come back, I was very excited to see his return. Just on Cejudo's retirement, do you think it is a real retirement, or do you think this is just a creative negotiating tactic to get more money? Because it wasn't that long ago that he was very, very set on all these money fights. Is this a case where, those offers haven't been met, or the discussion? Because you got to think, there were no extra offers, since this fight, right? They're not even talking matchmaking or anything like that. So do you think it's a real retirement, or do you think we'll see him back sooner than later?
I tell you what, immediately I thought, negotiation ploy. As soon as I watched, I said, guy's smart. He knows what he's doing. And Henry Cejudo, it does understand the business. He gets it, man. And I thought, man, that's a ploy right there. But I tell you what, man, when they got to the back and we got to the press conference, and Henry Cejudo was talking about it, I happened to look off to my right, and Eric Albarracin was there, his coach that has been his coach since he was 16 years old. Has been with him that long. And Eric was battling back tears, man. And wow. Eric, trust me. And if anybody that knows Captain Eric knows that he likes to play the game too, and it wouldn't be above him to play along in some promotional tactics.
Fake tears in his pocket.
Yeah, he's not that good of an actor. I'll tell you that. He's not that good of an actor. If you don't, well, I won't throw him under the bus. But he did a little bit with me earlier this week when I gave and it was not good. It was not good. He couldn't act this way. Okay, I mean, you could see the real emotion, man. He was battling back tears, man. He was crying, and man, they embraced when it was over. And Henry said, listen, we had talked about it, and I just feel the time is right. It is interesting because I tell you, he said that he'd originally thought about, going ahead and trying to have the Aldo fight. You remember he had kept saying he still wanted to do Aldo after this. And it was cool because he said, I thought it would be awesome to say I beat the best flyweight of all time, the best bantamweight of all time, and the best featherweight of all time, and then call it a career. I was like, man, I hadn't even thought about it that way because I didn't really like the Aldo matchup, the way it all came together. But I'm like, what a hell of an accomplishment that would have been to beat Demetrius Johnson, to beat Dominick Cruz, and then to beat Jose Aldo. That would have been amazing. But he said, listen, I just feel like the time is right, and I'm ready to step away. Now, of course, he did leave the door open. He did say, if the UFC is ready to add another zero to my check, I mean, I don't know that he's worth, that kind of money to the UFC. We'll see. We'll find out. But man, the guy, look, love him or hate him, the guy was entertaining, and he did accomplish some great things in his career. And the other thing you point to, and a lot of people, and I've seen this a lot on social media, people that are really in tune to the wrestling world will point out, of course, that Henry Cejudo retired early and on top as an Olympian as well from his wrestling career. So it's not out of character for him, to leave on top, to leave a little bit early. And it's funny, right? I mean, it seems like we always kind of complain that athletes don't know when to call it quits, right? And they hang around too long. Yeah. If he is, going out on top, kudos to him.
Absolutely amazing career, if that's the truth. Now, before you go, we would just want to get your thoughts on the Francis Ngannou fight against Rozenstruik. Man, sitting there live and seeing that, unbelievable, like seeing two trucks crash into each other. Were you genuinely worried when you saw that KO? And do you think the UFC ends up stripping Stipe like they're hinting at doing? And what did you think of those shots being there live and without the crowd there? Did it sound like a gun going off in the arena?
Yeah, Francis Ngannou is just a monster, man. The power that he has is scary. I mean, look, I guess if you want to, critique it a little bit, he was flailing pretty wildly. You know what I mean? So like his chin was up in the air and was open to being countered. So I mean, that is something that if I was coaching him, I'd say, hey, wait a minute, you took a real risk here and left yourself very exposed to do this. But good Lord, how do you argue with the results, man? If he lands one clean, he can put you out cold like that and scary. I'll tell you what was wild about it was, just how quickly it turned. I think this had to do with the crowd not being there, right? Like Francis Ngannou, if anybody's ever talked to him, he's the nicest guy ever. Like he's incredibly nice. He's very quiet, reserved, that sort of thing. But of course, he's scary as hell once he steps in the cage. But the fact that there wasn't that crowd to keep the celebration going, to keep the kind of, walk out, like he turned almost immediately to concern because it's just dead silent in there, and your opponent is scarily unconscious, and they're calling doctors in and that sort of thing. And you could see the concern on Francis' face, man. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. You know what I mean? So that was kind of weird. And I think that was a big part of the crowd not being there. But listen, man, his power is scary. His confidence is building. The run that he's on is phenomenal, and it's clear that he's the number one contender right now. I think it's a weird position right now in the heavyweight division because with Stipe Miocic saying, "Listen, man, I'm a first responder. I'm a paramedic. I'm a firefighter. I feel a commitment to my community that I need to fulfill these duties." How do you strip a guy that's doing that? You know what I mean? I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you consciously do that. Now I get it. A lot of people say, well, how can the UFC strip the guy if they said you don't have to fight if you don't want to during the pandemic? Well, it is still their title. You don't have to fight if you don't want to, but it doesn't mean you get to keep the title. If the pandemic battle goes on for 5 years, do you get to hold the belt for 5 years? Absolutely not. You don't. So it's coming, man. I think we're going to find out something real soon. I mean, you can see the kind of negotiating going on in the media when Dana mentions, hey, Stipe's going to have to figure something out. We got this going on. You got Francis Ngannou just waiting. You got all, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot going on. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, with the states opening back up, everything's kind of opening. Every state in the United States has kind of got their own little plan. It's not a federal plan. So I don't know exactly what's going on in Ohio, but I know, for instance, I was talking to my wife back in Nevada, and certain things back where we live are starting to open up in these phases and that sort of thing. So hopefully, Stipe can get back into a gym and start training and make this happen, because I'd love to see the trilogy. Because I got to be honest with you, if I'm just being honest, I don't really want to see Ngannou versus Daniel Cormier. That's not the fight I want to see. I want to see the trilogy fight, and I think if Cormier were to beat Ngannou on his way out to retirement, like, you would just be kind of writing off a contender that's incredibly exciting. And meanwhile, if Ngannou knocks out Daniel Cormier in that type of fashion in his retirement fight, like, Jesus Christ, what kind of retirement fight is that for one of the greatest, So I want to see the trilogy fight. So I hope there's a way to make it happen. I just, to be honest with you, the thought of Ngannou DC doesn't really excite me that much.
What was great was hearing DC commentate the fight and being there as it happened and just seeing the look of his face when it was like, he might potentially have to fight Francis. How good was that? It was just unbelievable. It must have been hilarious for you being there and being able to hear everything DC was saying as they were commentating the fight as well.
It's hilarious because you can hear him over there just cracking up. You know what I mean? He's so fun in the commentary booth, and it's just it makes it entertaining. I love the fact that he doesn't take it too serious. He's out there during the middle of fights just talking about, where's Fight Island? Find out where Fight Island is from us. And I don't know. It's fun. It's different. You know what I mean? Like, it's interesting. You can't go too far, right? You can't go to a level where, like, you're not even calling the fight anymore. You're not providing insight. You're not doing that. But I think he has such a great balance where he's like, look, I'm giving you knowledge. I'm giving you facts. I know this sport as good as anybody, but we're going to have a little fun while we do it too. And yeah, it was funny that they were, they're just cracking up by themselves over there in the middle of the fights. It was good.
Absolutely. We'll let you go, John, because we don't want to chew up your whole afternoon in Florida. I was going to say also, if this is the last time we see Henry Cejudo competing, man, what a great way to go out. Like you mentioned, a lot of our heroes, a lot of our idols and favorite fighters in the sport, guys like Anderson and Fedor and BJ Penn, we love them during their primes, and then they just stick around so much more past their prime so far too long. So if Cejudo goes out on top, it's excellent. He's like the Seinfeld of MMA, going out on top when there's still more to give and still in demand. So much like yourself, John, all right? We've got 2 more events. We can't wait to see what you bring out for these next couple of events, and we're very curious to see how this whole protocol and process and testing and all this kind of stuff moves forward, and we can't wait to see everything on, obviously, your Twitter at MMAJunkie.com, at MMAJunkieJohn. Follow the man, and we appreciate your time, man. Stay safe, and we want to have some beers with you sometime in Australia, hopefully soon. So look out for yourself.
Definitely don't go out on top, John. Stay on top for the rest of the week. Don't take that literally, the Seinfeld thing. That's just for Cejudo.
I appreciate it. Trust me, man. I'm staying inside this hotel. I'm wearing my mask. I'm doing all the right things. And yeah, like you said, guys, I'm interested to see how this week plays out, see if any changes are made. But more than anything, man, I'm just happy to have the fights back.